जो बात संविधान ने कही और जो चिंता डॉक्टर अंबेडकर ने जाहिर की, वो आज समझ में आता है कि वो कितना आगे का सोचते हुए वो सारी बातचीत कह रहे थे। तो इसलिए जब डॉक्टर अंबेडकर कह रहे थे कि राजनीतिक लोकतंत्र सफल कर अगर होना है तो उसके लिए सामाजिक और आर्थिक गैरबराबरी को खत्म होना बहुत ज़रूरी है। लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि सरकार ने एक वोट एक मूल्य एक व्यक्ति, वो ही सारी चीज़ को सोचते हुए सोच लिया कि सब कुछ हमने दे दिया है और आपको संविधान दे दिया है, कानून दे दिया है, लेकिन क्या सामाजिक गैर बराबरी खत्म हुई?
After partition, 1949 or so, that the minority question was reopened, and now the different groups were taken out of the minority definition, and the questions raised in the Constituent Assembly on the category minority itself. कई खास के कांग्रेस राइट के जो रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स थे, उन लोगों ने सवाल उठाया कि अब पार्टीशन तो हो गया, अब हम क्यों माइनॉरिटीज़ को कंसेशन दें? ज़रूरत क्या है? वी वर डूइंग इट so that the partition can be avoided, but now the partition has taken place, why should we concede anything? And that is where Dr. Ambedkar rises up and intervenes and says that the rights of the minorities are absolute. They are not based on any kind of conditions, historical conditions and so on.
This session will be quite enriching and also quite encouraging each one of us. మళ్ళీ నేను ఐ విల్ మిక్స్ బోత్ తెలుగు అండ్ ఆల్సో ఇంగ్లీష్. మరి మార్నింగ్ సెషన్లో మాట్లాడినప్పుడు చాలా మరి థొరాట్ గారు ఓపెనింగ్ సెషన్లో మాట్లాడినప్పుడు కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ అనేది అంబేద్కర్ గారు మరి తను యాజ్ అ డ్రాఫ్టింగ్ కమిటీ చైర్మన్ తీసుకుని రాని ఎంతవరకైతే తను తీసుకురాగలరో తీసుకుని వచ్చారు. కానీ దట్స్ నాట్ సంపూర్ణంగా తను చేయాలి అనుకున్న కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ కాదు. దానికి రిఫరెన్సెస్ ఇచ్చారు. మిగతా చోట్ల మరి ఎక్కడెక్కడ తను యొక్క భావాలను వ్యక్తపరిచారో ఆ విధంగా ఆ విషయంలో చూసినప్పుడు హౌ మచ్ ఇట్ ఈస్ ఇంపార్టెంట్ యాజ్ ది అంబేద్కరైట్స్ యాజ్ వెల్ యాజ్ ది హ్యూమన్ రైట్స్ and also those who believes in the democracy and social justice, we need to preserve the constitution and protect the constitution, because that itself, which was later Justice Sudarshan Reddy garu, he has actually explained in terms of the history how it is coming, but how much it is under the threat. So therefore one need to understand the context, the local context, and how do you take it up. So while both senior speakers talked from the context, historical context, and also the relevance in where the constitution is presently is poised, and also the importance of to protect it, because there are forces who are trying to either dilute it, and also they're talking about a different kind of new theories that are coming up. Therefore how it important that we need to protect as well as defend the constitution and the constitutional rights. So in this context, when we are having this 75 years of celebrating the years of Indian Constitution, I think there are two aspects. We are talking about socio-economic justice, and it has both the element. You have the marginalized sections which are clearly defined as the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Then you have minorities based on the linguistic, religion and various other categories, and these are the two, both the marginalized community as the minorities. In that sense is clearly in a way defined, and it has its own space within the constitution, and it has recognized their rights. and it is also recognize the historical injustice done, especially to the marginalized community in the context of the Dalit and Adivasi community, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, if you want to talk from within the constitutional point of view. So we need to ask how much this journey has given us the context, and also at the same time how much it has actually realized the socio and economic justice. I remember in 2004-5, we are having the World Social Forum, Asia Social Forum, and during that time our former president Narayanji was there, and he was addressing the students, and that time he mentioned that it is not that constitution that fails, it is the people who are entrusted the power to implement the constitution, they fail the constitution. Constitution doesn't fail because constitution has clearly defined the parameters, the context in which the state is recognizing the marginalization, and also therefore it has enlisted certain rights and mechanisms how to remedy those historical injustice. So it is important that having a constitution alone is not sufficient, but you also need people who believe in the constitution and who takes the spirit of the constitution and then make it implementable. That's the dilemma. I think perhaps that is the context in which we are facing a very, very difficult time. So therefore it is important that we recognize that the Indian constitution gives that a wonderful scope, and therefore the realization of the socio and economic justice very, very important part and parcel, not only at the preamble but also throughout the constitution. I can list n number of what you call, either you talk about the Article 14, which talks about the equality before the law and equal protection of the law. Then you have the Article 15, which prohibits the discrimination. Very, very important element, which normally you do not find in every constitutions, this kind of phrase. It's about prohibit the discrimination based on the various identities, including the race and caste, sex and place of birth, religion. And apart from that, it also gives you a certain protection where the people from the religious minorities can promote their own identity and culture. Therefore, it gives the certain particular rights. And so therefore, it is important that we recognize that the constitution makers understand the context and vulnerability and marginalization. Therefore, they have created a framework that define and created the space where the state can address that. How much that journey has gone? Is it still a theory? How much it is put into the practice?
बाबा साहब अम्बेडकर ने संविधान का ड्राफ्ट सौंपते वक्त में जो उनका बहुत फेमस भाषण में कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन की बात कही, मुझे लगता है कि आज हम उसको बार बार याद कर रहे हैं कि संविधान का सपना क्या था और उसकी आज की हकीकत क्या है। क्योंकि जो बात संविधान ने कही और जो चिंता डॉक्टर अंबेडकर ने जाहिर की, वो आज समझ में आता है कि वो कितना आगे का सोचते हुए वो सारी बातचीत कह रहे थे। तो इसलिए जब डॉक्टर अंबेडकर कह रहे थे कि राजनीतिक लोकतंत्र सफल अगर होना है तो उसके लिए सामाजिक और आर्थिक गैरबराबरी को खत्म होना बहुत ज़रूरी है। लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि सरकार ने एक वोट एक मूल्य एक व्यक्ति, वो ही सारी चीज़ को सोचते हुए सोच लिया कि सब कुछ हमने दे दिया है और आपको संविधान दे दिया है, कानून दे दिया है, लेकिन क्या सामाजिक गैर बराबरी खत्म हुई? मैं जिस जगह से आता हूं और आप भी सभी जहां जहां से आते हैं, हर दिन हम आज भी ये सुनते हैं कि लोगों को सामान्य जो एक नागरिक अधिकार है उसको प्राप्त करने के लिए भी मरना पड़े। मेरे अपने स्टेट में तो ऐसी भी कहानियां हैं जहां अगर कोई दलित मूंछ रख ले तो इसलिए उसको मार डाला गया। या गंदम जी जिस जिले में रहे वहां तीसरी क्लास का बच्चा स्कूल में एक मटकी को छू लिया, इसलिए टीचर ने मार डाला क्योंकि दलित था बच्चा। या घोड़ी पर बैठने के लिए दूल्हा दुल्हन को घोड़ी पर बैठने के लिए कई जिलों में ऐसा सिचुएशन है कि जैसे गृह युद्ध छिड़ा हुआ हो। हमारे यहाँ एक आईपीएस दलित आईपीएस को अपनी शादी में घोड़ी पर बैठने के लिए पूरे जिले का जाप्ता लाना पड़ा। कई बार ऐसी हालत हो जाती है कि लगता है कि ये शादी करने जा रहा है या इसको जेल में कहीं ले जाया जा रहा है। इतना पुलिस वाला उसके इर्द गिर्द घूमते हैं, बाराती कम होते हैं और पुलिस वाले ज्यादा होते हैं। आप सोचिए कि जीवन जीने के लिए पानी पीना तो सामान्य बात है, हर आदमी का हक है कि वो पानी पी सके, मंदिर में जा सके, सड़क पे चल सके, अच्छी कपड़े पहन सके। ऐसी सिचुएशन है एक जिले में जहां मैं गया, राजस्थान में, और उन्होंने कहा कि मंगलवार के दिन दलितों का चेहरा नहीं देखा जाता है। हम बात अनटचेबिलिटी की कर रहे हैं, ये चीज अनटचेबिलिटी से आगे अनसीएबिलिटी तक है कि हम तुमको देखेंगे भी नहीं। ये जो इस समाज की स्थिति रही है, उसको एक ऊपरी राजनीतिक लोकतंत्र तो मिल गया, लेकिन वो राजनीतिक लोकतंत्र इसलिए सफल नहीं हो पाया क्योंकि नीचे जो समाज चल रहा है वो संविधान से नहीं चल रहा है, वो मनु के विधान से ही चल रहा है अभी भी। और मनुस्मृति से अगर समाज चलेगा, जाति पंचायतों से समाज चलेगा, तो फिर आप ये सारी कहानियां सुनेंगे जहां पर लड़का और लड़की ने प्रेम किया और शादी की तो उनको हैंग कर दिया, कहीं पे मार डाला गया। ये सब चीजें जो है ये रोज हम ये सब चीजें सुन रहे हैं। तो इसलिए मुझे लगता है कि ये जो सामाजिक और आर्थिक गैरबराबरी को खत्म करने का टास्क पूरा करने का जो बाबा साहब ने कहा, वो नहीं होने से राजनीतिक लोकतंत्र भी कमजोर है। वो भी ठीक से नहीं, वो अधिकार मिला, लेकिन मुझे कई बार लगता है कि वो कागजों में अधिकार है, वो हकीकत में जो अधिकार होना चाहिए वो नहीं दिखता है। हमारा संविधान का प्रियम्बल सामाजिक न्याय और राजनीतिक न्याय की बात करता है, अवसरों की समानता की बात करता है, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि न्याय बहुत दूर का शब्द है। एक सिविल राइट्स एक्टिविस्ट के नाते मैं रोज देखता हूं कि न्याय की लड़ाई बहुत आगे की लड़ाई है। हरगोपाल सर और हम जिस सत्र में थे, उनके आने में देरी हुई तो मैं थोड़ी देर बात कर रहा था, तो मैं अक्सर ये कहता हूं कि मैं एक मानव अधिकार संगठन में काम करता हूं, मानव अधिकारों के लिए लड़ने के लिए, लेकिन हमारी लड़ाई, दलितों की लड़ाई तो यह है कि हमको पहले मानव तो मानो, हमको आप इंसान मानेंगे तो इंसानों के अधिकारों की लड़ाई हम लड़ेंगे। वो लड़ाई तो दूसरा कदम है। पहला तो यह है कि हमको इंसान ही नहीं मान रहे, आप जानवर से भी बदतर है, जहां पर लोग हमारा हाथ का छुआ हुआ पानी नहीं पीते हैं लेकिन गाय का मूत्र पी लेते हैं, वो पवित्र है, उसमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं है। गाय मर जाती है, उसका कोई स्किन उतार रहा है, तो हरियाणा में 5 दलितों को जिंदा जला दिया गया, और जब कहा गया कि ये क्यों किया, तो वीएचपी का राष्ट्रीय महासचिव गिरिराज किशोर कहता है कि गाय हमारे लिए दलितों से ज्यादा पवित्र है। तो क्या संदेश है? संदेश ये है कि तुम जानवरों से भी नीचे हो, अभी तुम इंसान भी नहीं हो। तो एक तो इंसान होने की लड़ाई और फिर इंसान होने के नाते अधिकारों की लड़ाई, 2 तरह का एक संघर्ष हमारी जिंदगी में होता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि हमारे पूरे दलित आंदोलन ने सामाजिक गैर बराबरी की लड़ाई को तो बहुत गंभीरता से लिया है, और उसके लिए लड़ाई भी लंबी लड़ी है, और संविधान का शायद सबसे ज्यादा उपयोग अगर कहीं हुआ है तो वो सामाजिक गैर बराबरी को खत्म करने के लिए हुआ है।
So when we talk of socio-economic justice and Indian Constitution and what's happening now, see, one of the unique contributions of Dr. Ambedkar, while he has given us not only a legal document called Constitution, but it also has given us a philosophy, a vision as to what type of society one has to create. The uniqueness of Indian Constitution is unlike many constitutions in the world. Constitution essentially is a legal document which distributes power between different organs of the state. And there it stops. Constitution of India gives a philosophy. Now, since philosophy cannot be incorporated in the fundamental rights, so there is a part 4 of the Constitution where from morning we are talking about socio-economic justice. That entire concept of justice is incorporated in the part 4. When there was a debate in the Constituent Assembly, this part 4 is not justiciable. You can't go to Supreme Court or High Court asking this right should be enforced. This has to be enforced by the people. But part 3 gives us the freedom. It gives us the freedom to fight. That's where civil rights movement is located. Fight for what? Fight for the Part 4 of the Constitution. So normally in our civil liberty discourse we say Part 3 is enforced in the courts, Part 4 is enforced in the streets. So you have to continuously build movements. And having written this constitution or having been instrumental constitution, the uniqueness or perhaps creativity of Dr. Ambedkar is he prophesied what is happening now. This is where even when you read Nehru, see Jawaharlal Nehru's writings and his autobiography, then glimpse of world history and all that, it gives a graphic idea of the then society. But Dr. Ambedkar said this is the type of society we have to create, a fair and just society, equitable society. So therefore liberty, equality, fraternity, they become essential principles. But he always had a doubt whether in independent India the powerful classes would ever allow for realization of this goal. And that's why when he made this statement that when we enter, this famous statement of Ambedkar, that today we enter into a world of contradictions. On the one hand, we are ensuring equality, one vote, one person, one vote, one value. That means all human beings have equal value because every vote has the same value. But then he said the equality we have ensured in the political system, whether this would lead to social and economic equality. And then he said that if this political equality does not lead to the social and economic justice, people of India will blow up the constitution. He used the word blow up the constitution. It's not the people of India who blew up the constitution, it's the ruling classes who are blowing the constitution. And it's the people who are fighting for the constitution. Ambedkar thought people will reject the constitution because constitution is not useful. But what has happened in reality is today, if you look last elections, everybody is holding constitution, including the ruling party. And today everybody is saying there is a celebration by ruling parties and by the people for equality, for justice. That's why today a constitution became a central document. But I would like to remind the House that Dr. Ambedkar, when he has written Revolution and Counter-Revolution, that's where he cautioned all of us, be careful. Be careful. Because he said, if you perform a revolution, the dominant Brahminical upper caste classes, they will perform a counter-revolution. And they know it's so clearly written that when Mayawati ji became the chief minister, all of us thought that it was a quantum jump, a Dalit woman becoming chief minister of one of the largest states. But having read Dr. Ambedkar, Revolution and Counter-Revolution, I have written a paper that Brahminism versus Bahujanism, rise of Hindu fundamentalism. I thought that they would not allow the Dalit Bahujans to get into power and they will do something to undo what has happened and the nation is likely to move in the opposite direction. See, this is prophecy. I mean, this is so prophetic. We were always, talking of the constitution, but we were not taking the caution that Ambedkar gave that be careful. If you have got power, you have to fight so much to retain that power. And you have to completely consolidate the democratic social forces. And perhaps somewhere, what he prophesied has happened. How did he come to this conclusion that it's very likely that this nation or the classes may perform a counter-revolution? He came to this conclusion because he thought Buddhism, which was one of the most progressive religions of the world, where Buddha thought that the cause for the dukkha is in the structure. It's not somewhere in a karma or external to our life. It's a cause. You have to change your social structure. If dukkha, your wants are a cause of your dukkha, then you have to carefully control your wants. Justice and peace are very important. This is what Buddha said. Perhaps any religion which is based something like on Buddhist philosophy, the world would have been much more peaceful. But today, we see that the Buddhism, what Jawaharlal Nehru called child of Indian thought, బుద్ధిజం అనేది ఒక మానవ చరిత్రలో ఒక సమాజంలోని అత్యున్నతమైనటువంటి ఒక దశ. అది భారతదేశ ఆలోచన విధానంలో తాత్వికతలో బుద్ధిజం వచ్చింది. బుద్ధిజం హ్యాస్ గాన్ టు చైనా, బుద్ధిజం హ్యాస్ గాన్ టు జపాన్, Buddhism has gone to different parts of the world, but the birthplace of Buddha or Buddhism is defeated. This Dr. Ambedkar says, look, the capacity of the Brahminical ideology in defeating something of the Buddha and Buddhist ideology. So therefore what is happening now is that a constitution which provides a vision for an equitable, fair, just society. And preamble of the constitution presents a vision. What type of vision you should have to change your society? But transformation of the society has become so difficult when consciousness of the people is going up. And Dalits have become conscious, tribals have become conscious, marginalized sections have become conscious, women have become conscious. The consciousness today of the society is far better, far more than ever in the history of India. At no point the people were as conscious as today. The poorest Dalit woman, when we were carrying a campaign for equitable education and common education, one very poor woman, she said, I want my children to get quality education. She wants quality education. Now that means first time in the history, a most marginalized section want their children to study. Once this consciousness has come, what has happened? Entire education system completely collapsed. Government schools collapsed, entire curriculum has been changed, and now you find a very sad picture in education. I studied in a common school in my village along with my Dalit friends. In 1950s, there were 3 classmates of mine who were Dalits. There was also a boy, one who was also a beggar caste. And every Sunday he used to come to beg. And my mother used to say, your classmate has come. Now imagine that what type of composition of the class in 1950s. But today, you go to a government school, only poor children are there, and all the other communities, all the castes are in the private schools. You find hierarchy of schools. In fact, to change the society for social justice, if you want to realize social justice, education, that Dr. Ambedkar considered very instrument himself, started a college, he started an evening college, so that people can work in the morning and study in the evening. And see why he took so much of interest in education, because he thought education will transform the society. Once you are educated, you will fight for your rights. Once you are educated, you are conscious of your dignity, your self-respect, and therefore he thought education is a critical instrument. And that's the reason why he himself started education institutions. Today what happened to education system? What is the crisis of education system? Entire public institutions collapsed. Completely private sector has taken over the education, and education has become a big mafia. And unless you have lot of resources, you can't study. And the quality of education in government school completely has come down. Look at the public universities in our own state. And look at the 12 universities. What is the situation? No faculty.
So basically, I'll be restricting myself to the given topic, 75 years of Indian Constitution, and assessing the achievements in socio-economic justice. A Canadian theologian, Dr. Don Carson, once said, a text without a context is a pretext for a proof text. So if a text is separated from the context, or if its context is removed, it can become a pretext for any ideology or any theory, which further means that such context removed text can be used misused, or even abused as per the convenience of those who are using it. Here, the Constitution is the text. The context as to why the Constitution has written in the way it is written, or why it had to be written in the way it is written, forms the context. The context of drafting the Indian Constitution is very deep and revolutionary. If we don't understand the context, we might not be able to appreciate the significance or achievements of the text, that is the Constitution. If it is so, then what is the context of the Indian Constitution? Baba Saheb told, coming into force of the Constitution on 26th January 1950 is not simply India becoming a republic, but ending the philosophy of the counter-revolution, which was the guiding principle for the governance and of the society for the last 2000 years. You all know what is the counter-revolution in India. Just to brush your memory, it was the coup d'etat of Pushyamitra Shunga in 185 BCE, killing the Mauryan emperor Bihadratha. What followed the overthrowing of the Bihadratha was not only large-scale murder, but the complete overhaul of the guiding principles of the society. What did the counter-revolution stood for? It stood for inequality, it stood for patriarchy, it stood for divisiveness. The counter-revolution stood for hatred, ignorance, and delusion. When Baba Saheb has told that the philosophy of counter-revolution has ended with the coming into the force of the Constitution, what he meant was that the Constitution has ended inequality as the guiding principle for the new nation. The Constitution has ended hatred as the guiding principle. The Constitution has ended patriarchy as the guiding principle. The Constitution has ended ignorance as the guiding principle. Mere ending of some foundational or guiding doctrines is not enough if they are not replaced with, new doctrines. The society will easily go back or relapse into the old methods. What are the new guiding principles that were instituted or put in place by the new Constitution? We all know what are the new guiding principles of the Constitution. The new guiding principles of the Constitution are: equality is the new guiding principle, justice is the new guiding principle of the state, liberty is the new guiding principle of the state, above all, fraternity is the new guiding principle of the state. Let us now turn our attention to the context of the given topic today. It says justice. It is pertinent to understand what justice means. What did Baba Saheb has told about justice? In the book The Philosophy of Hinduism, Baba Saheb has told, the norm or the criterion for judging right or wrong in the modern society is justice. If such a norm or criterion to judge a society constitutes justice, what does it further delineates? Again, taking Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar's quote, it has been told in, again, The Philosophy of Hinduism, I want to explain what I mean by the principle of justice. No one has expounded it better than Professor Birchbourne. As interpreted by him, the principle of justice is a compendious one and includes most of the other principles which have become the foundation of a moral order. Justice has always evoked the ideas of equality, of proportion, of compensation. Equity signifies equality. Rules and regulation, right and righteousness are concerned with the equality in value. If all men are equal, all men are of the same essence, and the common essence entitled them to the same fundamental rights and to equal liberty. In short, justice is simply another name for liberty, equality, and fraternity. So, was the justice foundational norm either in principle or in practice of the society or at least of the state prior to the adoption of the constitution? Either in the 200 years British colonial period or prior to that 1800 years of pre-colonial period? No one can give answer in the affirmative. Not only the justice was not the foundational norm, it was not even one of the principal norms. Rather, the opposite of justice was the foundational norm. How inequality or the opposite of justice was the foundation in pre-constitution India, Dr. Ambedkar wrote this. I am quoting, "But the most striking feature of Manu's penal code, which stands out in all its nakedness, is the inequality of punishment for the same offense. Inequality designed not merely to punish the offender, but to protect also the dignity and to maintain the baseness of the parties coming to a court of law to seek justice. In other words, to maintain the social inequality on which his whole scheme is founded." That was the foundational norm before coming into of the constitution. Isabel Wilkerson, you might have read her book, The Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, is an American journalist and author. She says this: "The United States and India would become respectively the oldest and the largest democracies in the human history, both built on the caste systems, undergirded by their reading of the sacred texts of their respective cultures. In both countries, the subordinate castes were consigned to the bottom, seen as deserving of their debasement, owing to the sins of the past. These tenets, as interpreted by those who put themselves on high, would become the divine and spiritual foundations for the belief in the human pyramid willed by the God, the great chain of being that the founders would further sculpt in the centuries to follow as circumstances required." So these are sufficient to say that the justice was not the foundational norm in the pre-constitution India. Dissecting today's topic further, what is social justice? It can simply mean any society where there is justice in its social organization and also operation as the foundational doctrine. Can the pre-constitution India be called as one having a social justice as the foundational norm? Did the society or the state had equality? Did the society or the state promoted fraternity between one another? Did the society or the state had the knowledge and rationality as guiding principles? Did the society or the state had the liberty for everyone to choose what they want to do or think as the guiding norm? Did the society or the state had the norm to provide opportunities for all equally? It's a well-known fact that the answer for none of the above questions is yes. Let's turn our attention to another layer in today's topic, that is economic justice. Was the economic justice present in the pre-constitution India? Had the economic system followed in pre-constitution India provided for opportunities to educate, to gain required skills or cultivate their minds to reach to their full potential so that they can pursue what they want? Were the resources of the country distributed in an equitable manner so as to serve the common good? Again, the answer for all the above questions are an emphatic no. As Dr. Baba Saheb has told, the pre-constitution India, the norm was inequality and the prevention of majority from participating effectively in the economy. There was no social justice or economic justice, but with the adoption of the constitution, all that was reversed. Constitution has mandated equality, providing of opportunities to all without any restrictions. It has changed the underlying philosophy of the state so that in the course of time, the new norms of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity can become the foundational norms for the society as well.
I have been asked to speak on the question of minorities. और मैं एज अ सोशल साइंटिस्ट इस सवाल को थोड़ा हिस्टोरिकली और कॉन्सेप्चुअली समझने की कोशिश करता हूँ और उसको फिर आई ट्राई टू डू इट प्लेसिंग इट इन द इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट एंड सी दैट इफ माइनॉरिटी as a question emerged in India at some point of time, what was the surrounding situation? Why did it have to emerge as it did? And who were the main movers of it? How did they relate to the others? And how did the others respond to those questions? और अगर हम इतिहास में जाएं, हिस्ट्री में जाएं, तो we'll see that the idea of the minority itself comes with the rise of nationalism wherever. जब नेशनलिज्म का ग्रोथ यूरोप में हुआ, उन्होंने कहा कि एक नेशन, एक पीपल, एक ज़बान बोलने वाले अपना राष्ट्र बनाएंगे, दे विल मेक देयर ओन नेशन स्टेट, एंड दैट वाज द मोमेंट व्हेन माइनॉरिटीज़ वर क्रिएटेड. Those who could not fall into that kind of a definition, living in the same territory, speaking different language, different religion, were immediately seen as those who are outsiders, excluded from the idea of the nation. Their loyalties constantly kept being doubted, and this led to multiple, wars in Europe, etc. You can actually see the source, one of the reasons for the Second World War, the First World War, many wars which Europe went through on unresolved question of the minorities. Hindustan, maybe the minority question emerges with the rising tide of nationalism. नेशनलिज्म के हिंदुस्तान में आप देखेंगे, इतिहास पे जाएंगे तो अलग अलग ट्रेंड्स थे. If the Congress, Indian National Congress in the early years was at the center of organizing the idea of this anti-colonial nationalism, there were काफ़ी बहसें थी कि हिंदुस्तान एक नेशन भी, राष्ट्र भी है कि नहीं है. इसमें इतने सारे कंटेंडिंग ट्रेंड्स हैं. We do not have a horizontal solidarity as such. Neither our languages are similar, and yet this whole aspiration to become a nation, the aspiration to become a nation, क्योंकि इसी के बेसिस पे एंटी कॉलोनियलिज्म का पूरा जो है एक सपना बुना जा रहा था, तैयार किया जा रहा था. Now this is the question that it was at this point of time when you see the different kinds of forces, particularly those who were, somehow not very convinced with this idea, कि ये जो nation के जो imagination है, इसमें where are we? Are we anywhere there? क्या are we going to be excluded altogether? This question emerged from the south with, Periyar raising the banner of revolt. This question on the true intentions of the Congress at nationalism was what Dr. Ambedkar was constantly questioning. What is the content of it? Who are going to benefit? Where will the quote-unquote untouchables, where will they find themselves in this idea of nation? और इसी context में you will see around this time that the question of minorities also emerged. Initially the minority question is more or less represented by the minority elite, who also see the whole question around their own interest, more or less. There is one text of Dr. Ambedkar which is very rarely cited, and this also is a very complex text. Dr. Ambedkar's intellectual depth, which he marshals, और उसको इस चीज़ को समझने में जो लगाते हैं वो क्वेश्चन है पाकिस्तान पे. I think the demand for Pakistan is the title of the book. It came with two different titles at different point of times, and in which, although Dr. Ambedkar came to argue, I think at that time probably his understanding of religion being a nation probably would not, stand the test of time today. But there were other questions which were also very important there, which Dr. Ambedkar was raising. And these were questions around the minority themselves. The Constitution of India, adopted in 1950. It went, the process of the making of the Constitution एक लंबा process था, और in which Dr. Ambedkar really played a central role. But whether all the wishes and desires of Dr. Ambedkar could be accommodated, particularly in the question of minorities, particularly on the question of the safeguards for the scheduled castes or other backward classes, including also the rights of the citizenry, whether all of them could be adopted, it remains a matter of question, because around this time itself, 1945, Dr. Ambedkar actually was proposing a constitution itself, जो बाद में state and minorities के नाम पे से publish हुआ. Now this was the time, 1945-46, the minority question was being reopened. The constitution draft constitution had, in the definition of minority, included religious minorities, linguistic minorities, as well as all the depressed caste, classes, or backward groups, tribes, and so on. They were all seen as those posited against this whole tyranny of what Dr. Ambedkar would say, the communal majority. The majority, in Ambedkar's view, is not a numerical majority. Caste Hindus are not a numerical majority. But it is the power, which disproportionate amount of power which they have come to accumulate, that makes them the majority, a dominant majority, which suppresses and discriminates against the minority. The minority could be actually a numerical minority in that sense. In my understanding, well, I'll come to it. Dr. Ambedkar's this state and minority, that document which he prepared for the Scheduled Caste Federation, उसमें उन्होंने आर्ग्यू किया कि ये जो कोशिश हो रही है कि शेड्यूल कास्ट को माइनॉरिटी की डेफिनेशन से अलग कर दिया जाए, this is something which definitely he was not very comfortable with. But at the same time he said कि minority question is also not separate from the scheduled question of the justice for scheduled castes, or even question for the justice of individual citizens. तो उन्होंने कहा उसमें he documents separately the rights of the citizens, making them very robust rights, or to be compromised only in very limited kind of situations. The rights of the minorities, as well as the rights of and protections for the scheduled castes. These are part of a same compendium of rights, and not visualized and compartmentally separately. Because Dr. Ambedkar was of the view that a communal majority should not become a permanent majority in India, because that will be something most detrimental to the idea of Indian Republic. Or this communal majority can be checked only if there are minorities of different kinds, minorities because of their caste status, minorities because of their religious status, minorities because of their status in terms of gender or so on. All these minorities are able to come together. So therefore, he has very practical kind of solutions also offered within this, as if, for instance, the representation should be, he suggests, should be on the basis of population, but at the same time, no community should have more than 40% representation, so as no community can actually assume and become a majority of its own. Within this, state and minorities, he also suggests something very radical, that the questions of the minorities, remember here, in his idea, minority are not just the religious or linguistic minorities. So the question of the minorities have to be dealt by the minority representatives themselves. It should not be, and thus, a true kind of a voice, which an articulation of that voice, an authentic articulation of the voice of the minorities can take place. So, political sociology में, political science में एक theory है, consociationism का, और ये this idea comes very close to that idea कि every group gets representation, their questions get addressed by their own representatives in consultation with the other members of the assembly. Now, if we look at the constitution itself, of course, these suggestions of Dr. Ambedkar were not adopted. And in fact, after partition, 1949 or so, that the minority question was reopened, and now the different groups were taken out of the minority definition, and the questions raised in the Constituent Assembly on the category minority itself. कई खास के कांग्रेस राइट के जो रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स थे, उन लोगों ने सवाल उठाया कि अब पार्टीशन तो हो गया, अब हम क्यों माइनॉरिटीज़ को कंसेशन दें, ज़रूरत क्या है. वी वर डूइंग इट so that the partition can be avoided, but now the partition has taken place, why should we concede anything? And that is where Dr. Ambedkar rises up and intervenes and says that the rights of the minorities are absolute. They are not based on any kind of conditions, historical conditions and so on.
70 సంవత్సరాల భారత రాజ్యాంగం పట్ల ఒక అంచనా, ఏ అంశాల పట్ల, ఈ దేశంలో సామాజిక ఆర్థిక న్యాయం ఎంతవరకు జరిగింది అనే ఒక అంచనా కోసం ఈ సెమినార్ని ఏర్పాటు చేయడం జరిగింది. నేషనల్ కాన్ఫరెన్స్, అనేక రాష్ట్రాల నుంచి మిత్రులు వచ్చారు, అనేక మంది పెద్దలు వచ్చారు, ఉదయం చాలా విషయాలు మాట్లాడారు, ఇప్పుడు కూడా మాట్లాడారు. భారత రాజ్యాంగం అమలులోకి వచ్చి 75 ఏళ్ళు పూర్తి అయిపోయినాయి. ఈ 75 ఏళ్లలో అనేక మార్పులు వచ్చినాయి. 75 ఏళ్ళప్పుడు దేశ జనాభా 30 కోట్లు, ఇప్పుడు 140 కోట్లు. 140 కోట్ల జనాభాకి ఈ రాజ్యాంగం అమలులోకి వచ్చిన తర్వాత ఇన్ని సంవత్సరాలు 75 ఏళ్లలో ఎన్ని పరిణామాలు జరిగింటో ఊహించవచ్చు. ఒక ఇంట్లో 4 మనుషులు పెరిగితేనే భార్యాభర్తలు ఉన్నప్పుడు ఒక రకంగా ఉంటుంది, పిల్లలు పుట్టిన తర్వాత తల్లిదండ్రులు ముసలోళ్ళు అయిన తర్వాత ఇల్లు నడపడం ఎంత కష్టమో తెలుసు మనకి. కానీ ఒక దేశాన్ని నడిపించాలంటే ఎంత కష్టం ఉంటుందో అని గుర్తుపట్టి ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని ఒక ఫ్లెక్సిబుల్ రాజ్యాంగంగా, ఎప్పుడైనా దీన్ని సవరణ చేసుకోవచ్చు, ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని సవరణ చేయవద్దని చాలామంది చెప్పారు. అప్పుడు సవరణ చేసిన అవకాశం ఇవ్వకూడదు, ఇప్పుడున్నది ఉన్నట్లుగానే ఇవ్వాలి అని చెప్పారు. కానీ అంబేద్కర్ గారు సవరణలు చేసుకోవాలని ఒక ఫ్లెక్సిబుల్ రాజ్యాంగం మార్చారు. ఈరోజు అనేక సవరణలు జరిగినాయి. ఇది చాలా సమగ్రంగా ఈ రోజున ఉంది. ఇప్పుడు ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని మార్చాలంటున్నారు. సో ఈ 75 ఏళ్ళ తర్వాత ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని మార్చాలనేటువంటి వాళ్ళు పెరిగారు, ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని కాపాడుకునే వాళ్ళు పెరిగారు. ఇప్పుడు దేశంలో ఉన్న సంఘర్షణ అంతా కూడా ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని కాపాడుకోవడం ఎట్లాగా, ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని మార్చడం ఎట్లాగా, ఇది ఇప్పుడున్నటువంటి చర్చ ఇదే. ఈ సందర్భంలో భారత రాజ్యాంగాన్ని కాపాడుకునేటువంటి వాళ్ళు వారు ఎవరంటే, చాలామందికి రిసోర్సెస్ ఉన్నాయి. ట్రైబల్స్ గురించి మాట్లాడుతూ ఉన్నారు మనోళ్ళు. వాళ్ళకి ట్రైబల్స్కి రిసోర్సెస్ ఉన్నాయి అంటే వాళ్ళు రిసోర్స్ బేస్డ్ కమ్యూనిటీ, ఫారెస్ట్ బేస్డ్ కమ్యూనిటీస్. కొంతమంది నీళ్ళు ఆధారంగా జీవిస్తుంటారు, వాటర్ బేస్డ్ కమ్యూనిటీస్. కొంతమంది ల్యాండ్ బేస్డ్ కమ్యూనిటీస్ ఉంటారు. కొంతమంది మైనింగ్ ఉంటుంది, కొంతమందికి పరిశ్రమలు ఉంటాయి. కానీ కొన్ని కమ్యూనిటీస్కి రాజ్యాంగం మాత్రమే బేస్ అయి ఉంటుంది. అంటే కాన్స్టిట్యూషనల్ బేస్డ్ కమ్యూనిటీస్. ఎవరు వాళ్ళంటే, ఎవరికైతే ఈ దేశంలో మానవ హక్కులు లేవో, మనిషిగా జీవించడానికి అవకాశం లేదో, సమాజంలో దూరంగా విసిరేయబడ్డారో, ఎవరినైతే సమాజం ఎప్పుడు నిర్లక్ష్యంగా ఉంచిందో వాళ్ళంతా కూడా కాన్స్టిట్యూషనల్ బేస్డ్ కమ్యూనిటీస్. కాన్స్టిట్యూషనల్ బేస్డ్ కమ్యూనిటీస్ బాగా గుర్తుపెట్టుకునే అంశం ఏంటంటే, దీన్ని రాసినటువంటి, దీన్ని తయారు చేసినటువంటి, దీన్ని శిల్పించినటువంటి, రూపొందించినటువంటి మహానుభావుడు డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ని గుర్తుపెట్టుకుని 75 ఏళ్ళగా